Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're diving into some of gaming's most controversial moments.
You know those eyebrow-raising incidents where developers maybe pushed things a little too far?
We've got a ton of articles and gaming history lined up, so let's jump right in.
Yeah. We'll be exploring how these controversies shaped the industry, for better or sometimes for worse.
It's wild to think some of these oops moments actually helped shape the games we love today.
Totally. We'll be looking at everything from games that caused actual physical pain to some seriously censored content.
Speaking of changes,
Yeah.
remember back when games were considered just for kids?
Oh, yeah, definitely. It's a totally different world now. Like, did you know that more adult women now play games than teenage boys?
Wow, I did not know that.
Yeah, it's a huge shift from that stereotype of.
The gamer in the basement.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's wild. And with all that change came
Uh-oh.
some growing pains. Like, remember those Mario Party mini games that actually caused injuries?
Oh, man. Paddle Battle and Tug of War come to mind.
Oh, yeah.
It wasn't really the game design itself, but more about how players were gripping the N64 controller. The N64 had that kind of unique, almost joystick-like analog stick, and some players, especially younger ones, would use their whole palm to rotate it super fast, leading to blisters and even cuts sometimes.
Ouch. You think Nintendo, known for being family-friendly,
Right.
would have maybe anticipated that.
Yeah, for sure.
But, hey, at least they did the right thing. Send out gloves to players.
Yeah, that's pretty good customer service. It just shows how sometimes developers can miss the mark a little bit
Oh, yeah.
on how players will actually interact with their games. And speaking of unintended consequences,
Oh.
remember Night Trap?
Oh, yeah?
That game sparked a huge controversy back in the 90s
That bathroom scene.
with Lisa.
Yeah. People were freaking out.
It's kind of funny looking back now,
I know.
considering in that scene, the player's actually failing to protect her.
Yeah. It's like a game over scenario.
Exactly. A perfect example of how context can get totally lost in these controversies.
Totally.
But Night Trap wasn't alone. Mortal Kombat, with its over-the-top gore, was also under fire. And you know what? Those two games, controversial as they were, led to something really important.
The ESRB rating system.
Zingo!
Those games basically scared parents so much that the industry had to create a way to let everyone know what kind of content was in their games.
Pretty much.
From moral panic to age ratings, talk about a legacy. But speaking of controversial content,
Yep.
let's shift gears to South Park. The Stick of Truth. You'd think a game based on that show
Oh, right.
would be no stranger to pushing the envelope.
Exactly. The devs totally nailed the show's humor. But even they hit some snags.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Some missions, like the alien probing and abortion scenes,
Oh.
were just too much for some regions.
Interesting.
And the censored versions of those scenes are almost funnier than the originals. Imagine playing the game in Europe and bam, giant image of the European flag. Or a crying panda instead of the quote-unquote offensive content.
I kind of want to see that now.
It's pretty great.
It just goes to show that humor, especially edgy humor, doesn't always translate across cultures.
Yeah, sometimes satire in one place is straight up offensive in another.
For sure. Speaking of maybe missing the mark a little bit,
Yeah.
let's talk about Hitman. Absolution. The Hitman series is always known for its stealth and, assassinations. But this one went in a kind of weird direction with the Saints.
Oh yeah, those assassin nuns.
It felt a little off.
It definitely rubbed some fans the wrong way. Hitman. Absolution already had its fair share of critics. But the portrayal of the Saints, especially how their deaths were shown, sparked a whole debate about violence against women in games.
It felt like they were trying to be edgy, but it kind of came across as exploitative, especially compared to the more clinical style of the previous Hitman games.
Yeah, it's a good example of how even a well-established franchise can stumble when it tries to push those boundaries.
Without thinking about the consequences.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've seen devs get slammed for being too violent, but what happens when they try to dial things back and end up facing even more backlash? Take the 2012 Tomb Raider reboot, for example. The new Lara Croft was grittier, more realistic, which I thought was cool. But then there was that whole damsel in distress angle they initially went for. Remember that?
Oh, yeah, definitely. The executive producer's comments about players wanting to protect Lara didn't sit well with a lot of people.
I can imagine.
It felt like a step backward for this character who's known for being strong and independent.
Exact.
And then there was that scene in the mountains
Oh.
where it was implied that something really bad might happen to Lara.
Oh, yeah.
It sparked a huge outcry, and the developers ended up backtracking on their earlier statements.
It just goes to show how sensitive the portrayal of female characters in games can be.
For sure. Especially for an icon like Lara Croft. It's like they were trying to find that balance between showing her vulnerability while still maintaining her strength, and it just didn't quite land.
It definitely highlights the challenges of modernizing these classic characters and navigating those evolving expectations.
Absolutely.
You know, it's fascinating how all these early controversies really set the stage for so many of the conversations we're still having about gaming today, from violence and representation to the role of the player. These issues just keep popping up sometimes in unexpected ways. But we've got a whole stack of other controversies to dig into. So let's take a breath and get ready for part 2.
Yeah, it really makes you think about what we're comfortable with in games.
It's true.
What's shocking to one person could be totally normal to another.
For sure. We all have our own limits, right? And sometimes games push those limits whether they mean to or not.
Right?
Take Grand Theft Auto V.
GTA V.
It's a series known for its over-the-top violence and satire. But there's one scene that even die-hard fans found disturbing.
Oh, you're talking about the torture scene, where you play as Trevor
Uh-huh.
and have to torture this guy for information.
Yeah.
It goes into some really graphic detail.
It does.
Definitely not for the squeamish.
That one was rough.
Yeah.
It's one thing to have violence in a game, but this scene felt different.
Yeah, I get that.
It's like they were trying to make a statement about how awful torture is,
Yeah.
but it ended up feeling kind of exploitative.
Yeah, it's a tough balance for developers, trying to tackle these serious issues without being insensitive or gratuitous.
Yeah.
And sometimes it feels like they miss the mark completely. Like in God of War 3, when Kratos encounters the Poseidon princess.
Oh, yeah.
That was dark.
You've got Kratos ripping through the Greek pantheon,
Right.
taking down gods left and right.
Yeah.
But then you get to her.
And it just takes this disturbing turn.
Yeah. Her death is definitely one of the most unsettling moments in the game, especially since she's not really an antagonist like the other gods Kratos kills.
Yeah, she's just caught in the crossfire.
Of his revenge quest. And the way they initially handled it with that, I didn't do it, but I wish I did, trophy,
Oh, gosh. Yeah, I remember that.
just made it worse. Thankfully, they removed it later. But the scene itself is still there.
Yeah.
It's definitely a point of contention for a lot of players.
It goes to show that even in games with these fantastical settings and crazy action, developers need to be careful about how they depict violence, especially against characters who aren't like traditional villains.
Right. Speaking of pushing boundaries, remember Call of Duty, Modern Warfare 2, and the infamous No Russian mission.
Oh, yeah, how could we forget?
That airport massacre scene sparked a ton of debate.
For sure.
Was it just shock value,
Right?
or was there something more to it?
It's a question that's been debated for years. Some saw it as a gratuitous attempt to outdo the nuke scene from the first Modern Warfare. Others argued it was necessary to really drive home the brutality of the game's story. What's interesting is that even within Infinity Ward, the development team, there were differing opinions about the scene.
It's crazy to think that something that happens in a video game can spark such intense discussion, even within the team that created it.
Totally.
It shows how these games can touch on these real-world issues and spark these important conversations.
For sure. It's not just entertainment. It can be a reflection of our anxieties, our fears.
Yeah.
And it can force us to confront uncomfortable truths about ourselves and the world around us.
Like in Spec Ops. The line,
Oh, man, that game.
the white phosphorus scene.
Yeah.
It's haunting. It forced players to confront the horrors of war in a way that few other games had dared to do.
That scene really got under people's skin. Some players felt manipulated, like the game was forcing them to commit this terrible act.
Right.
Others saw it as this powerful commentary on the desensitizing nature of violence in games. It sparked a huge discussion about player agency and the responsibility of game developers.
It's a reminder that games can be more than just fun distractions.
Yeah.
They can challenge our thinking and make us question our own roles in these virtual worlds we inhabit.
Absolutely. And sometimes those challenges can be pretty disturbing. Like in Duke Nukem Forever.
Oh, no.
That hive section
Oh, yeah.
took things to a whole new level of creepy.
That was rough. The whole game was kind of a mess. But that section in particular was just wrong on so many levels.
Yeah.
The torture and impregnation of these female characters, all played for laughs.
It was just...
It felt exploitative and gross.
It really did. Like, they were trying to recapture the edgy humor of the original Duke Nukem games, but it totally backfired.
I think so, too.
Well, what might have been considered edgy or humorous in the past just doesn't fly anymore.
It's a reminder that times change, and what was once acceptable might now be seen as completely offensive.
Totally.
And as developers push these boundaries and explore new ideas, they need to be mindful of how those ideas will be perceived by a modern audience.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's crazy how those controversial moments can really overshadow a game.
It's true.
For better or worse.
We've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
Violence representation, the impact of games on our culture. It's a lot to think about.
Yeah, it really is.
But ultimately, it's up to each player to decide what they're comfortable with,
Absolutely.
where they draw the line.
Being informed and engaging thoughtfully is key.
Exactly.
It's all about recognizing that games aren't just mindless fun.
Right.
They can actually reflect and shape our values.
So, listener, what really stood out to you from all these controversial moments? Was it those painful Mario Party mini games? The censorship surrounding Night Trap and South Park? Or maybe how some games handled those really sensitive topics?
Like violence against women or the horrors of war.
It's incredible how games can spark such strong emotions and get people talking about these important issues.
And as gaming continues to evolve, it's important to remember these controversies and learn from them.
Yeah, who knows what the future holds? As technology advances, we're bound to see even more controversial moments in gaming.
Probably.
And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's a chance for us to grow, have these dialogues, and deepen our understanding of the relationship between games and the people who play them.
It's a journey we're all on together.
Exactly. Well, that about wraps up our deep dive into gaming's most controversial moments.
Thanks for joining us.
Until next time, game on.